Welcome to A Time to Thrill. It's me, your host, Amy Austin. It is March 2023, and that means that this month Without Consent releases. I'm super excited for you to read book 2 in the Nicole Long legal thriller series. If you haven't started with Nicole Long and you're still stuck with Casey Court, Nicole now has a lovely prequel novella called Outcry Witness that gives her whole tragic backstory. And book 1 is Major Crimes and Without Consent is coming out a week from now on March 8th. And after that, the next book will be The Murders Began. And that's all I have planned for Nicole Long right now. I'm no longer planning 10 books into the future. Never again. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. Anyway, if you also, for subscribers to the Amy Austin newsletter, there is a short story that features both Casey and Nicole called False Positive. If you haven't already, check your inbox and you should download it. It's free, it costs you nothing. But for those of you who may have missed it, actually, I'll just include a link in this newsletter. But without further ado, let me tell you about this month's guest. This month's guest is USA Today bestselling author Pamela Dumond. First, she left. So, Pamela was a longtime fixture of LA. She lived here longer than I did, and she just moved at the end of last year. It's very sad. So many people have moved. We used to do beach walks, and so we will not be doing beach walks on the ocean anymore. Not for a while. The other thing that I think you should know about Pam that I think is fascinating is that she is the power, the story behind Erin Brockovich. So about 20 years ago, Julia Roberts starred in Erin Brockovich, which was a great movie. She won an Academy Award. The movie did really well. But the origin of that story starts with Pamela Dumond. So you got to stay tuned and listen to that. Otherwise, it's been busy getting ready for a new release, and I have spent a lot of time chatting with authors who are some of my favorite people. Hopefully, some of the people I've been chatting with, I'll convince to do the podcast. It's a little bit of arm twisting for some of them because introverted, shy people do not necessarily want to sign up to do something broadcast. But I usually convince them. So hopefully soon we'll have some other authors that I know and love and that you probably know and love. So that's all that's going on. Without Consent is out March 8th. You can read False Positive for free. Outcry Witness is the prequel. Major Crimes is book 1. And The Murders Began is book 3, which will be out hopefully at the end of 2023. It's February and the end of 2023 already feels ambitious, but fingers crossed. So without further ado, USA Today bestselling author Pamela Dumond. Hi, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. This is your host, Amy Austin. This month, I'm delighted to welcome USA Today bestselling author Pamela Dumond. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
How are you?
I am. You're hilarious. I'm doing well. I'm doing well considering it's just been a crazy year, and but I'm doing well, thanks.
So the first question I have is, how is life outside of California? Because you've lived here,
God,
I feel, okay, almost 20 years, more than 20 years. How many years?
30 years.
Oh my God. Okay.
I know. Oh my God.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I know. I moved there basically to get married, and then when my marriage like broke up, I'm like, I am not going back to Chicago. I am staying here for all the good weather. And I stayed for 30 years, and I finally it just hit me this last summer like I had to leave. I had to go. And when I made that decision, it was just it was I didn't want to go like the next year. I wanted to go the next day.
Oh my God.
I know.
So I can't. So how? Okay. Oh my God. I I am not always a fan of California, but I don't know where else I'd live other than New York City, and those are two really expensive places. How did you decide to move where you did? Because the world, well, okay, maybe nobody moves to Illinois now because I could just see the weather now. Now I say it out loud. I don't know why I'm asking that question.
It was like, no, no on Chicago because I can't do that -40 like
Yeah, I know.
anymore.
I just realized after I asked it, it's hard. It's cold now, and it's really hard.
I
Um,
know.
so you did not want to move back there to a familiar place, even though it's cold as hell up there sometimes.
No, I just I couldn't do it. I mean, it's like it dawned on me that I needed to be like when I lived in Mar Vista, which is close to Venice, and
Mhm.
it was so charming when I moved there. It was sweet. No one really knew the area, and it was cute little bungalows built, for the was it Hughes, that the Howard Hughes airport that
Oh, the
became
defense,
this.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was so cute and charming and small. No one knew about it, and all of a sudden, like Google came in and all the little charming houses were like knocked down and McMansions were put up, and then COVID happened, and it just became kind of a clash between the very wealthy and the very poor and the people that had been sticking it out for a while. And
Mhm.
it wasn't charming anymore. It didn't feel safe anymore. It just wasn't home anymore. And I'm like, why am I trying so hard to stay here when I can go someplace else and have it be and build a new home? And Charlotte, my dad, when he got remarried, he moved down here, and so I'd come down and visit him and his wife. And Charlotte felt really comfortable. It felt
Mhm.
very woodsy. It's very pretty. It's a lot less expensive. Unlike the Midwest, like some of the roads have curves in them, which is very exciting. So I'm like, I'm going to Charlotte, and I did.
And how long have you been there? I want to say 4 months, but I don't know.
Almost 4 months. I landed in October, and like kind of like October 8th. It was this insane road trip. Like my friends were like, you can't drive by yourself across country. I'm like, I have to drive by myself across country because the airlines will not take two cats. It made no sense for me. One of them was geriatric. It made no sense for me to hire someone. It just was like, I'm going to do this insane cross country road trip and drive, and I did it. I was shocked.
And so how okay, so 4 months is not 50 years, but how do you like the change so far? I mean, I will say this, I think one of the issues during COVID is that the lifestyle that we had significantly changed. So it's not as if were going out to parties like everywhere in LA today and then tomorrow you're in Charlotte. So I mean, that's a big the shift maybe is not as big in that after with the COVID in between.
Well, it how has it well it's been so bizarre because when I landed here, I had a rental car because my mechanic's like, your car is not going to make it across country, so you have to, get something else.
Mhm.
So I drove in a bigger car. I got here, I dropped off the rental car, and I was carless. So I ended up walking everywhere or taking lifts. So it was in a strange town for the most part, in a new place, without a car.
Mhm.
And all I knew is Whole Foods was 1.8 miles in one direction from where I lived, and the other grocery store was 1.8 miles in the opposite
Oh my
direction.
god.
So I just bought a car, so I was carless. Everyone's like, "How's Charlotte?" I'm like, "I don't really know. I just know where I can pretty much walk to, and that
Mhm.
is really good."
So, with a car, how do you like it better? I mean, okay, so here's the thing. Y- As an author, you're mostly home all day. So you
Um,
are now mostly home all day in a different location. Is it substantially
exactly.
different?
Yeah, it's much more like the Midwest. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago with a lot of trees. I grew up in Downers Grove with a lot of trees. That's why the Grove is in next to Downers. There was a grove there, and lots of trees and wooded areas, and that I went from being in an apartment on the second floor in Venice with the next door neighbors on either side, like 8 feet away, to being in this townhouse that is like 758 square feet with vaulted ceilings in a loft looking out over a tree and a backyard with squirrels and bunnies and birds and deer. And I'm like, oh my God, I landed in an enchanted forest. How did this happen? Where I was used to, like, the guy who beat up his wife who lived down the block and the naked streaker and, like, what happened? I've moved to this enchanted fairy tale land called Charlotte.
But
So it's wonderful in that regard. And I'm paying a fraction of the cost of Venice, so which
and
just
is it more inspirational? I'll ask this because I haven't
yes,
written
yes,
outside of a large city, so I don't know.
yes. It is more inspirational because I feel like I'm living in a tree house. So when I realized, here's the interesting thing is I'm friends with Erin Brockovich, and she came out to visit a couple times. She was doing some work with Camp Lejeune. I'm going to say that incorrectly,
Mhm.
where there was the very, 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 very bad toxic water situation there, and many, many people got poisoned. And so she'd come around. I didn't have a car, and we'd tool around. It's the only time I got out of the house was when she came into town, and we drive everywhere. And I tell her these stories, and I said, do you realize? I said, my dad is buried at a church that is 1 mile from the place that I rented. And I didn't know that when I rented the place. I had no
Mhm.
idea.
Oh
So,
wow.
and Erin looked at me, she goes, oh my God. She goes, he called you home. He called you
Mm.
home. And I'm like, it just got me so emotional. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like, he did. He was probably there on the ride and, my crazy, insane cross country trip. So I'm a mile from where dad is buried. So right now I'm home.
That's great. So you mentioned Erin Brockovich, and so that's one of the first things I think I knew about you. So, well, can you tell people who Erin Brockovich is? Because I don't know what anyone knows.
Um, Aaron Brockovich, about 20 years ago, they made a movie about something that she did was pretty amazing, and I think all people, not all people, but a lot of people that are middle aged and or older know the movie, and it was because it was titled after her, which was very
Right.
smart. It was called Erin Brockovich, and she was down on her luck, single mom who got a job at a little kind of piddly law firm as kind of a clerk, basically, and she was filing these papers, and she realizes that there was a cancer cluster in this small town in California, and that really no one was paying attention. And she started, because she's so bright and she has a kind of mind that can put things together, she started figuring out where the cancer was coming from, and it was coming from the water.
Mhm.
PG&E was basically knowingly poisoning the water in this small town, and people were coming down with all these bizarre kinds of cancers, and the kids were, getting sick, and not just like a little bit sick, but like really sick, and people were dying, and it became this huge big lawsuit, and the little guys won. The little guys
Mhm.
won, and it was basically because Aaron was so persistent and so determined and spent so much time with that very, very bright mind and those very, very short mini skirts that she used to love to wear, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And I felt very strongly at the time when she would come in. I was her chiropractor, and she'd come in and she'd tell me these stories. I'm like, oh my God, Erin, like, this is a hero's journey. Like, this is an amazing story. This would make a great movie. And she's like, well, if you know him, anyone, tell him. I'm like, I think I do.
Mhm.
Because these are the things that happen in LA.
Right.
I think I do know someone. And so Carla Schomburg came in, and Carla was at Jersey Films at the time, and she was new to Jersey Films, and she was dating Michael Schomburg, who was one of the owners, and she was, unbeknownst to me, she was looking for female empowerment films. And I'm like,
Hmm.
holy moly, here we go. And I told her this story. I said, I have this story about this woman who did this amazing, amazing thing and helped all these people, and then ended up, basically getting, paid a couple $1 million for, as a bonus to help. And she's like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, no, true story. And so I set them up. I remember we went to Carla's house. It was on Aaron's birthday, with a bottle of champagne, and Aaron, to introduce the two of them. And Aaron showed up in one of her, like, she loved wearing those high heels, like those big tall high heels, and this
Hmm.
mini skirt. And Aaron's tall, she's like 5'11", and she, with the bustiers, and Carla is like little itty bitty petite, looks like a little wood sprite, what I mean? And that was how they started sharing, Aaron's story, and that's what kicked the whole thing in. And then a couple years later, it became the Academy Award nominated. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, and Julia Roberts won Best Picture, and it was directed by Steven Soderbergh, and it was amazing.
Hmm. And so, can I? Okay, that is well. It's I want to say it's either an LA thing or a unique experience. How do you feel about that? Like bringing those people together to bring that story to the world.
How do I feel about it? I have happiness and sadness. Happiness that the story got out.
Hmm.
Happiness that the story got made. I'm sad that I didn't know at the time that I should be attaching more to that story.
Hmm.
And so, in hindsight being perfect sight, I would have found a way to become more attached to that story. I did get a special thanks credit,
Hmm.
but again, hindsight being perfect sight, it would have been nice to be more of that ride, if that makes any
Hmm.
sense.
Right. Did you think about that back then? Because I don't know. I'm trying to think.
I was going
Um,
through a divorce back then, and so that's pretty much, my head was really in the fact that I was going through this split with my ex-husband, and I didn't. It just wasn't on my radar.
mhm.
It's like,
No. Yeah.
yeah. So there you go. But then X number of there you go. But then X number of years later, it was really nice is that interest has arisen once again, and I'm blanking on her name. The writer who does Grey's Anatomy, not Shonda Rhimes, but I can't think of her name. But the one who kind of inherited that whole dynasty from
Hmm.
Shonda, did they licensed Aaron's based on Aaron's story, and they did an ABC show called Rebel that lasted a year. So a lot of interest came up around that time,
Hmm.
and so I was on ABC 2020, which was super fun, and so it kind of cycled back around, if that makes any sense.
As everything does, I think here. So many things coming around and go around, which is why nobody
Yeah,
ever says no, because you never know when they're going to come back around. Um, and so you're friends with her to this day. So she's been in Charlotte to see.
yeah, she's you know, she is a dynamo. She's become, I think, quite the figurehead for um, um, the issues with water pollution, and issues with um, toxic cases where big corporations basically take advantage of smaller people and smaller
Hmm.
towns and smaller communities, basically because they can, you know. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, she's a figurehead for that. She's very smart. She's very feisty. She's very down to earth. And so I think when people come up with, they're like, who do we want to be able to talk to the people? They think of Erin because she is so down to earth.
No, it's happened in Massachusetts, I'm sure you know, and like Tom's River in New Jersey and
Yeah,
many other places where they have these cancer clusters and everyone pretends that they have no idea how it came to be until,
exactly.
until we reveal how it came to be. And a lot of lawsuits, but unfortunately, a lot of death and illness, especially of children who
Yeah,
don't have the bodies to tolerate large, massive carcinogens. You know what I mean? So
right.
it's 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 unfortunately an ongoing problem. I'll just say that, which is it's really unfortunate. But they pop up from time to time, and it often makes me sad. Actually, I wrote a book about one, fictional, and because it happens so often,
Is
and
that the case in court?
yeah,
The
yeah,
case,
it's
yeah.
yeah, it's a book
Okay.
called Poisoned, but basically, there's a cancer cluster and everybody like throws up their hands and they're like, I don't know. Um, and in the book, unfortunately, I mean, it happened the way it often happens where people get compensation, but the compensation's insufficient. I don't know. I don't know if
Yeah.
there's enough money to make up for my child, has, childhood cancers or, especially in a country where we don't have, universal health care. So it's just, it's not great. It's not great. I
Well,
don't know.
it's even when you look at, there's so it's I think we live in this disposable age of I'll do whatever I want because if they find out, what does it matter? Because
Right.
I'm more big and powerful, so therefore I can do whatever I want. And then they get caught, and it's like a slap on the wrist, and then they go do it again because
Yeah.
it's you know.
No,
And I
it's
agree.
yeah. I mean, I've read a lot about it, and it's not. It started with I can't remember the Jonathan Harr book. This is so many years ago. I think that's Massachusetts, and then I read the Tom's River one too. And it's just that they can hop to the next place because we live in a society where people would be like, "Oh, we want the corporation to come, or we want the jobs to come," and the consequences are not borne by the people who bring the problems.
Exactly. And I think with Erin, um, the draw is that she's so smart. She takes no bullshit, but she's also very relatable and
Hmm.
kind. And she would walk into a living room. Um, she can, and the poorest living room of someone, in 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 a small house in a tough community, as easily as she could walk into a Malibu mansion to go to some
Hmm.
party. There's no discrimination in her mind. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that's one of the very relatable factors about her, and that's why they continue to these law firms continue to work with her to shed light, you know, on issues. So
Yeah, no, so it's a super interesting thing. So speaking of which, are you practicing as a chiropractor now that you moved? Because I know state to state, moving credentials is its own
I
hoop
know I
jump.
haven't. Yeah, to be honest with you, I have not even checked into it yet because getting there were so many moving parts just to get here.
Hmm.
um, that I'm like, I'll deal with that when I get here. And I haven't even looked into it yet. All I know is that I'm keeping the California license, I'm keeping that updated, and I'll deal with the other, when I have time,
And so how did you move from I have this conversation on this podcast fairly often because the women I interview all seem to have had some other job that would not necessarily lead you to make the leap from that to author. So I'm going to ask you the chiropractor to author leap. How did that happen? What was it about? What happened? How did you get from one to the other?
Well, I think it was more about how I got back.
Mm.
Um, when I was a kid, my parents were, my father especially, he's like, you can't go to school for silly things. You know, you must have a profession.
Mhm.
and there weren't that many professions back then, according to my father.
Mhm.
And, like, doctor, lawyer, was kind of it. And,
Mhm.
so my brother was a chiropractor, so he's 6 years older. So I always kind of had that little younger sister thing where I thought, "Well, if he can do it, I can do it too." So I became a chiropractor, but I've always been a reader, always, always. Um, I stuttered when I was a child badly, so my mom would kind of like drop me off at the library, and I'd pick up 10 books, and then she'd pick me pick me back up and take me home, and then take me back to the library next week. I'd drop off 10 books, pick up ten more,
Right.
So it was a love of reading and writing at a very early age that I didn't know what to do with. So I was constantly trying to write all these decades and all these years. And my ex husband actually um, was involved in nonfiction writing. They would hire writers to write the material and then kind of put their names on it, as an
Mhm.
anthology, so to speak, which
Right.
was interesting in and of itself. Um, like, oh, you don't really write that. That's cute. um, but so I was constantly looking for where's it going to be for me? Is it going to be in nonfiction? Is it going to be fiction? When they picked up Aaron's story, I'm like, is it going to be screenwriting? And eventually, I wrote a bunch of scripts, took a bunch of classes, did all of that. And then eventually it became, I knew this woman who was writing kind of a cross between a mystery and like a romantic mystery, basically.
Mhm.
um, High octane action adventure, and she got six figures with a traditional publisher. And I'm like, well, again, like, maybe I could do that.
Right.
And because it's always like, maybe I can do that. And so that's when I started focusing on basically a funny mystery, and I started shopping that to agents. Everyone was like, no, 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 no. And I finally found someone who said yes. And then she ended up getting fired. And at that point, a friend of mine took it to this teeny tiny press. And he's like, yes. I'm like, great. And that was 2010. And then by 2011, I'm like, what do I need this guy for? There's a thing called self publishing. So I don't know. That's kind of how it got going, I guess.
Wait, did you get your rights back from that first book?
Yeah, he only had it for 2 years, I think.
Wow. So
It
what
was
happened to his teeny tiny press? I always wonder what happens to
his
people.
trade press. Well, I think his he made enough money from a handful of people that he did pretty good, and then everyone kind of wanted to go off and do their own
No.
thing. And then the gates of self-publishing had opened,
Mhm.
and so he still had a couple people, and then he and I parted ways after we had a fallout on some political stuff that he mentioned on social media, which isn't the best idea in the world.
I know. He needs a friend. They all need a friend who's like, don't post that.
I know, and he didn't have it, and subsequently I found out through that mutual friend who set me up with this press that he's passed on. But I will always be grateful that he gave me a chance, because otherwise I'm not sure I would have had the chutzpah to self publish my first book.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think so for many of us, not all of us, because I've met a lot of people who were like, I'm just going to put it right out there. And I was always like, wow, okay. But it was only after a disappointing traditional publishing journey where you're like, oh, I can do that. It's not, I mean, look, if I had come out with six figures and like a ad on the side of a bus, I may have been in a different position. But as a romance writer who was writing, serious romance, we were a little bit more disposable and actually may still be. And so when I realized the publisher didn't love me as much as I thought they might, then you're like, oh, I can do this on my own because I love myself more than you love me. For you, I'm one of 50 or 500 or whatever. And for me, I'm one of one. Um, and so when did you self-publish your first book?
I did a novella in 20, oh gosh, I think it was like December 31st, 2011. I think I snuck it in like the day before.
Mhm.
Um, and then from there on out, it was just like, I thought that I did a YA time travel that I shopped for a hot second and then realized it wasn't vampires and, or dystopian, so that wasn't going to fly
Right.
back back in 2012. So yeah, I kind of got into it in 20, end of 2011, 2012.
So you were a
So
fairly early adopter because the earliest people I know were 2010, and I don't know if that's when it first you could first do it on Amazon or when they first had the Kindle or whatever. I met those people and I was like, "Oh, I don't usually throw myself off a cliff, but I will watch you and see what happens." But by 2012, well, I don't think I published my first book until 2013, maybe. By then, it was not the way it is now, but certainly a path that was more available. Did you enjoy the early days of self-publishing? Because it's so much different than it is now.
yes and no. I never made zillions of dollars self-publishing. It's like I always seem to find that niche that is not quite the niche. Like, oh, that's a weird little cozy mystery. You're not supposed to have like sexy times. I'm like, oh, I'm not. So, and also, it seemed like every time I get to that point,
Mhm,
something like a little bit of squirrel mind. I couldn't stick to a lane.
mhm,
I also um like in 2012 I decided I couldn't keep up with the house, so I decided to let that go. And then in, 2013 we started having problems with my mom's health, and so 2013 was all about what do we do with mom, like
mhm.
moving her from here to here to here, and then all of a sudden we're in 2014. you know
Right.
So I could zip by. It's like, oh, here we are,
Right.
So all these people that were like I'm making $1 bazillion self-publishing. That was not me.
Mhm. So wait, can I ask you, I mean, okay, your mother is a different issue, but if you had to do it over differently, would you have done it any differently? I mean, would you have
I
picked a lane
would have
or I don't know.
I would have picked the lane. I would have picked the lane. I
Mhm,
did not know that. I just was so like I was just dying to write YA. I was just, I like the cozy mysteries, but then I got kind of a little bored, and I also I couldn't, except for a handful of people. I'll never forget this. This is going to sound so ridiculous, but I joined Mystery Writers of America because that's what we're supposed
mhm.
to do. And I went to their holiday function in LA, and I kid you not, it was like 7 people huddled around a little fire in an empty building, and I'm like, who are these people? I'm like, this is so sad. I drove all the way to Hancock Park for this.
Mhm.
And I'm like, and I'm like, I think I need to get involved in the romance community. They seem like they're more fun. So, um, we know how much fun that was.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I really, in hindsight, I would have picked a lane and made
Mhm.
myself, or at least 2 lanes instead of 3 or 4.
Right. So wait, what genres have you written? I know there's a time travel, I know there's YA, and I know there's cozy, and then there's just well, I was like contemporary romance, but sweet.
Well, I also got a little bent out of shape, and I started writing spicier contemporary
That's
romance
right, yes.
um,
Right.
because I needed to. And
Mhm.
and then when I came up with the Courtesan series, I'll never forget talking with you about that time that we went to see
Tracy
Tracy, what's her last name? Yeah,
McMillan, yeah.
Yeah, and telling you that I just remembered that idea for that series. So that series has again been like consumed a lot of years, but it's also been so interesting because it's almost a cross between a romantic mystery thriller,
Right.
kind of a domestic noir. It can't quite shove itself into a little niche. It could kind of overlap. So I write in too many, you know.
Oh my God. So wait, I have so many questions because I remember, okay, you finished the quarter. So wait, how many books have you written?
I don't know. Um, I got into writing short little ones for a while,
Hmm.
and because I wanted to write faster, the whole fast, fast, fast thing.
Yes, fast
I was
release, rapid release,
not
yes.
very good at it. I'm not very good at that. And so I would be like, "Oh, let's write something really quick. It's about blah 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 blah,"
Hmm.
and 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 then I'd be like, "Oh, well, that's only like 33,000 words or
Hmm.
34,000 words." So I think I've got like 32, 35, something 30, something like somewhere kind of in there,
Okay, so
and
what
so
are the majority of them? Because there was also comedy too. Now that I think about it, there's yet a
I
lot of lanes.
know. I know. I'm in a lot of lanes. What's the majority of them? Well, the Annie Graceland mysteries are what I started with and what I'll keep doing. I've
Hmm.
just made that character evolve, right?
Right.
Um, and the last one that I wrote for her was the last one that I can think of that I like. I actually I made her move to Wisconsin. Poor Annie. Not because Wisconsin is not glorious. It's just it's cold, and
Right.
but I got her with her aunt, her great aunt, who is a retired witch, and her cousin who's taking Zoom classes to become a witch, and the haunted Cheesehead Lodge, and those are soup that I only have one in that, but total Annie Graceland books I think are around 10 or 11 maybe.
Oh, okay. So there's a potential lane. So okay, I have two questions, but I'll start with the go back question. When you said you took classes, were they mostly like screenwriting classes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you have well, not a different because LA is full of people who do screenwriting. But in terms of being an author, do you think that taking the screenwriting classes helped you be a better novel writer in terms of
Yes.
developing stories? Because that's something we
Yes.
talk about all the time. Like screenwriting is very specific. Okay, it is very specific form, but it's very much about telling a story in a very short, I don't want to say short, but a limited time format. Like it can't be 6 hours. I mean, look, there's people who make the 6 hour movies, whatever. But for the rest of us, the movie has to be like a certain length. Um, and it has to hit certain beats. Whereas novels obviously are a little more fluid. But as we've
Right.
learned from, like Theodora or anybody who talks about this, it's much, I don't want to say it's better if you follow a formula. It's better if you hit your beats.
I
um,
totally agree, and I think that novel um, that the way it's laid out, the way the beats are laid out. If you look at the hero's journey, if you look at Chris Vogler, the writer's journey, Chris Vogler's works,
mhm,
Chris is amazing, amazing. Um, I actually got to know him because his wife was my realtor,
mhm,
and I just, what a nice, charming, wonderful, smart man. But so when you follow the beats of that story, I feel strongly that you can apply that to a novel quite easily. And
mhm.
why not? Because it's a roadmap, you
Right.
know. And when I was doing courtesan, and I had in my brain this completely bazonker story um, that I got two whiteboards, like enormous whiteboards, and I put circles on them. And then I made the hero's journey circle on each whiteboard about what would happen within that story, you
Mhm.
know. And it was all screenwriting posts that you really kind of want to or need to hit, you
Right.
know.
Right. Yeah, no, it's super interesting because I only read, so there are plenty of, I mean, there's like Stephen King, there's like, Annie Lamott. There's plenty of books about writing,
Right.
on writing bird by bird, so on and so on. And I have them all on my shelf. But what I only came across maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, somebody's like, "Have you read Save the Cat?" And I'm like, "Excuse me, what?"
Oh,
And so when I read those, the 3 books of that one, it was only then that it became a little bit more compact and less amorphous, that storytelling thing. It
I
was
agree.
much more
I
like,
agree.
"Hit these beats," this is the way you tell an engaging story.
Exactly,
Uh,
and when I do the big white poster boards, and I would do a circle, and I would put, here's my beginning, and I would go through the Save the Cat, like, beats, you know what I mean?
mhm,
What needs
right,
to happen here? What needs to happen here? What needs to happen here? And it all made sense, you know what I
right,
mean? It all made sense as to arc it out like that, and even, you know, God bless him for, like, saying things like, "The Pope is in the pool." I'm like, "Pope in the
right.
pool? What's the Pope in the pool moment?" You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it was just so great to be able to figure that out and see what was needed, because my mind will work in details, and to
Mhm.
put those details down and have them make sense, super duper helpful.
I think actually, to be honest, now that I think about it, I think that the authors who got the most training in that, in my opinion, are those who wrote for Harlequin because they had to write to a specific formula, to a specific word count. And the parameters used to be, I think they're a little looser now, used to be very tight. And so people who could tell an engaging and sort of lovely story within these very, very tight parameters are able to excel as storytellers because they had that early training. And I think that
Structure, so
yes,
interesting.
but I have found people who move from screenwriting or people who move from the early traditional romance publishing days do both have that structure. I think if you read a lot of books, you can sort of absorb that structure, but books are a little amorphous and there's so many outliers, especially in traditional publishing. Actually, I was thinking about this yesterday. So I've been reading a lot of traditional publishing books lately. And what's
Mhm.
interesting is that indie books really do start in media res. They have more dialogue, they have more action. And I'm reading a book now, and I swear to God, it's a New York Times bestselling author. The first 2 chapters are just backstory. His family came over on the Mayflower, and then his grandfather did this, and then his father did that, and then his mother moved here, and then he went to the Hamptons, and now he's in Andover. And I was like, oh my God, is this 20 pages of like just just disposition? And then it was like the heroine, and it was like she was born here, and then they got in their car and they drove across country, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't nobody talked until chapter 3, and then it was only like briefly before they launched into backstory. I'm like maybe a quarter, a third of the way through the book, and this it's still telling, and I'm like, is anybody ever gonna have a conversation? um
But you know
and
what's
so,
really interesting is
mhm.
that, um, have you watched White Lotus?
Yes, I saw it on a plane, actually
Okay,
a long plane ride.
okay.
Yes.
So, I I read an interview with Mike White,
Mhm.
and he said that he wrote all these quirky stories,
Mhm.
um, but not that many people watched them, and then he finally figured out he should put a murder, like, in the first episode. And I'm like, "Oh my god, I need to Mike White, like, the rest of my from here on out, I'm gonna try and Mike White, like, the rest of my
Mhm.
books, because I too am guilty of, like, let's wait a really long time to get to where we need to go before the story opens." And my friends are like, maybe you need to move that up a little bit." And
No. Oh god. It's
so I hear you, you know?
And I'm not gonna say I'm not guilty of this. Like, I realized, I don't know if I've told you this, like, a few years ago, like, I realized, like, the first 4 or 5 books I wrote, that she was either driving or sitting in her house looking in the mirror, and I thought contemplating her life, and I was like, "Oh my god, please stop." So I never, even if I think that way, I have to either write it and throw it away or start farther along, but I know that the urge is like, I have this whole story in my head. Let me tell you the whole thing.
The
Um,
whole story,
but
every single detail that you must know.
right. And so while as a listener, I'm happy to hear all sorts of details. As a reader, I am finding that one of the reasons I don't know, maybe it's because I'm older, just start the story already. And you can tell me later about his like Mayflower family, but can we just who does he meet? What's gonna happen?
I know. I
I
know,
mean,
it's so interesting. It's like that's I think how we evolve though as writers is
mhm.
at the beginning we want to share every single detail. And now like 10 years later, or 11 years later, however many years later, is it 13 years later? I'm like, just get to the story, Pamela. Just
I
tell
know.
them. It's like-
Yeah,
so
it's actually an interesting journey, and I know the unfortunate part, I guess, is that we all have to start at the beginning. Um, but my tolerance for meandering, both in reading and my own writing, is much lower than it used to be. I'll just say that. Um,
I'm with you.
it's
And
just
sometimes I look at my older works, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? And
I
I'm like,
I know. I trust me. I look at it. I go, "Oh my god! I can't believe anybody slogged through her like inner monologue to get to the story." But bless you for buying it. You know what I mean? Like, bless you for that. It's just interesting to see that. So, speaking of which, one of the things that we have talked about. Well, okay, let me go back. One of the things that you did that was really interesting is you did how can I say this? Your book was adapted for this online platform app. I'm so bad. I'm so old. Called Chapters, and I. How would you describe it? It's a. I don't even know. I want to call it like choose your own adventure, but I'm dating myself even with that. It is an interactive graphic storytelling medium. I don't know. How would you describe it?
well, let me see if I'm gonna um, answer that question correctly, and if not, steer me in a different direction. So, a couple years back, Chapters adapted a cozy mystery about a cat who basically thinks he's James Bond.
Right.
Although we call him something else because that name's been taken.
It's the best.
And at the time, I don't think the company, Crazy Maple,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
knew
So.
what was going to stick. So they optioned a whole bunch of different types of stories, and they kind of, you know, did a little of little cozy mystery, a lot of romance. And I think eventually, I think enough years have gone by. I think Chapters, which is the name of their app and their not their company, but their platform, it
Mhm.
seems to really be hitting it with romance. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Mhm.
So they at the time would not allow, you know, I think they do allow now, but back then, 6 years ago, whatever it was, 5 years ago, whatever it was, would not allow the authors to adapt their own material into game format. However, that said, I am now
Mhm.
with a different company and I am allowed to not only adapt my stories into a game, but they have created the software to make a game
Mhm.
platform. So
Okay.
that's what I'm working on now, which is really exciting, at least for me.
And so this is the Story Loom, correct?
Yeah, this is Storyloom. So Storyloom is owned by Pixelberry, and Pixelberry is the company behind Choices. And
Okay,
Choices
right.
is another interactive story, choose your own adventure platform. Different company than Crazy Maple, different company than Chapters. And so I had been talking to a friend of mine a couple years ago. I'm like, where is the platform with all these apps that are coming out now? Where is the platform for people to self-publish their own games? And
Mhm.
this is it. This is the
Okay.
platform. Yeah. So it is still in beta. So they have developed all of this software and to literally drag and drop and create your own story. They have sound effects, they have art, they have backgrounds, they have music. It's nuts. Um, they and I started working with them back in September in their beta group. Right, we weren't
Okay.
even really allowed to talk about it until December.
Mhm.
They have not launched big time yet. Um, it's still very close to the ground,
Mhm.
but beta is open. If you want to go and play games, you can currently play them for free. If you want to check out their software to adapt your own story, you have access to that. There is no sign up with credit card. It is only a Gmail. Pixelberry is renowned for being a really great company who treats their employees well and treats their people well. And they're really into supporting whoever needs to be supported. It's like they're a good company. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I'm really excited to see it's a new venture. It's like, I'm really excited to see what becomes of it.
So
Um,
have so let me ask you, because on the front end, so I did do your chapters game years ago, but this is so many years ago now. Um, are the story lim okay, from the user end, are they similar in terms of, you know, guys walking down the street? Should I talk to him? Should I not talk to him? The choose your own adventure aspect, I guess.
it depends on the author. Okay,
Hmm.
so because we everyone's a little different.
Hmm.
We go in and we figure out what I mean. I adapted courtesan because
Okay.
I wanted to see what courtesan would look like as a game.
Hmm.
Okay, and not just one courtesan book. Oh no, no, I'm doing five.
Oh wow. Okay.
so but I wanted to see what it would look like, and um, so I pick. I don't think the art is as fancy as the art that you're going to find in a choices game by Pixelberry or in a chapters game by Crazy
Hmm.
Maple, but the art that is comes with their software to be able to drag and drop a box for your character to go into a platform and say, I want my character to be male or female. I want my character to be anime or look like a visual novel. I want my character to have this skin color. I want my character to have this kind of face, round, square, diamond. I want my character to have be aggressive, neutral, shy. I want my character to have this kind of hair. I want my character to have this kind of eyes. I want them to be
Hmm.
how old. Like we pick everything, which
Hmm.
is wild. you know, it's just wild. It's like being in this little universe of all the people that talk to you in your head when you created a story.
Right.
Now you're taking those little people from your story and giving life to them in a game situation,
Okay, so
which
are
is
you adapting both your own and others as well?
I'm not adapting others. I'm only adapting my own right now. Right now, I am adapting Courtesan series as a romantic mystery, as a thriller, as a romantic thriller, and I'm also adapting my big fake mafia wedding as a rom
Mhm.
com.
Okay, so can I ask you, so from beginning to end, how long would you say it takes to, I don't have a good verb for this, put your book into this format?
Well, it's so interesting because it's changing because it's in beta, and
Right,
so I started this in September when I was getting ready to move cross country. So, needless to say, I didn't get that much done that month.
right.
Um, and and as we go along, they keep updating the software. They keep
Right.
updating the art. Like at the beginning, they had no pictures of anyone in like winter. I'm like, where is the snow? Like my readers are complaining that I have the Christmas scene and it's like green outside. Like, would you please give me some like snow? You know what I mean? And so it keeps changing. So how long it takes it was different from September until now,
Okay.
and that's based on how far they are coming with their software and how far I am coming with learning how to, when you talked about screenwriting, adapt or write in a game format, which is different than novel.
Oh my God. So how is it different? Because, okay, so let me say this. So my son does play some video games, and I played video games a lot when I was like let me just say like 30 odd years ago. And they are much more story focused and a lot less open world than they were when I played. So when I played, there'd be like save the princess and it's like 40 hours between here and there, and how you get there, good luck figuring it out. And now I think they have a lot more guideposts for gamers. It's like, here, you're going to save the princess, but here are the 8 steps, get in the castle, learn the lock system, disable the guards and things like that. So it's a little bit more signposted. In
Mhm.
the thing that you're doing, is it more for readers? Is it more open world, or is it certainly like signposted?
I think it's both
Okay.
because, for example, because this in this in Storyloom, the beta writers come from many backgrounds. The beta writers are coming from a gaming background. They're coming from novelists. They're coming from screenwriters. They're coming from comedians. They're coming from, you know,
All different
one
kinds
guy.
of storytellers. Wow. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what's so, like, wild is to watch how people do things and to see what their forte is and to be like, "Wow, I never would have thought of that." And then, my forte is obviously with Courtesan, it's gonna be more linear because I know who did what, and
Hmm.
that's not gonna change at the end,
Right.
like,
Right.
and so I can give people suggestive choices along the way, but that's not gonna affect the outcome of the story because at the end of the story, person who's the bad guy is still going to be the person who's the bad guy. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Uh-huh.
So, but you can literally, some people are saying you can play as the elf, or you can play as the witch, or you can play as this or that, and you will affect how the story changes. So
Okay.
everyone is doing like a different thing. And that's what's so interesting is they're not really coming down on us and saying you need to do it this way. They're saying we want to see what you want to do.
This is so interesting. So how okay,
Fascinating.
A, how are readers, users,
It's
um,
not it's not blown open yet because it's still in beta.
but
So
you're having some interaction with them. Yes. Or
um,
or do they comment? I actually don't know.
not a lot of people commenting yet. Not a lot of people commenting. I think the original plan was they were gonna do a soft launch end of March. I don't know if that's still happening.
Mhm.
That's the other thing that's super interesting. It's like the goalposts keep kind of moving.
Right.
So because we're in beta, we don't know that much, you
Right.
know. So, it's just kind of seeing like what happens, like when I started this, and I had in my big fake mafia wedding, I'm like, well, I'm going to have a wedding at some point, so I need a bride character. And they only had like, I think 2 or 3 bride characters. I'm like, but she doesn't look like anything like my other character. And they're like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, no snow. And now, you can make bride character out of like, 5,000 different bride characters.
Mhm.
So it's so interesting.
And so what made you start doing this? Because I know you have been, was it the introduction to that chapters game space, or what is it that has piqued your interest about this space?
Um, number one, I've been knocking on Pixelberry's door for a couple of years because I feel like they're such a reputable company. I really kind of wanted to get a foot in the door there, right?
Mhm.
And because when chapters wouldn't, years ago, they wouldn't let me adapt my own thing. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to Pixelberry.
Right.
Who still said no, but in a much more kind fashion. And I just kept knocking and knocking. And then, like I said to my friend, I'm like, who's going to do the KDP? Who's going to do the, and she's like, Pixelberry. I'm like, holy smokeroonies. And so, I was supposed to start with them like last March. And then, my friend who had been hired as an editor for them, she had a family tragedy and, she bowed out. And so, they contacted me in August and they said,
Uh-huh.
we're entering round two. Are you interested? I'm like, I'm like, I was going through radiation at the time. I'm like, sign me
Mhm.
up. Yes. So, and I was getting ready to move and I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It's so exciting because I didn't know what was going to happen with, writing books while one was going through radiation or moving cross country or, any of that. So I'm
Right.
like, but I'm like, I can do this and I can learn.
Mhm.
I can get on the ground floor and I can learn. And ostensibly, if I come away from this and I know how to write a game, because I'm
Mhm.
I'm a novelist, right? For the
Right.
most part, I'll have a whole new skill set.
And games are growing. That's insane.
Yes.
Like the amount not only of games, but the gamification of other kinds of platforms.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting is, like, and being the control freak in terms of my stories, I'm like, "Gosh, won't it be fun to see my characters, like, with backgrounds and with, like, hairstyles and with, like" you know what I mean? "Who's the love interest? What are they gonna do?" You know?
Right.
So much fun. A lot of hard work.
Yeah. So, okay, story loom aside, what are okay, in terms of novels, what is your plan going forward? Because you've talked about doing lots of different things, but have you sort of settled on how you would like that part of your career to develop going forward?
I yes and no. I mean, basically, like, when I had surgery for the breast cancer, which was
Mhm.
in March, um, and it was, the DCIS, which is, in my humble opinion, the best kind of breast cancer to get.
Mhm.
Not that one it would like to get any, but
So
that
you
to
mean
me
the
is the best.
ductal carcinoma in situ,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. DCIS, best kind to
Mhm.
get. And I said, I need to take a break. I need to I need to heal up. I need to go someplace that's more healing. I need to be kinder to myself. I need to let go of some of the stuff that I've been through the past, like, X number of years. And so the novels, I'm not sure. It's all I knew was that it was almost like kind of like a burnout, but
Mhm.
not just from writing. So I don't know. There's part of me, like, I'm getting ready to republish. I did a part-time princess, like, short story novella, for Descent, which was an anthology to raise money for reproductive rights,
Mhm.
and I'm going to republish that. I'm working on the cover right now. I have another Annie Graceland, Cheesehead Lodge mystery that's half in the can. I've got another Annie Graceland before she moved away from LA that's half in the can. Um, I'm really, really on my wish list is to write a standalone thriller and possibly shop it to, like, Amazon,
Mhm.
because I find myself really in the thriller headspace these days. I can't quite lose the romantic part of the thriller, you know.
Right.
I'm almost more in that headspace than I am in the cozies.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like it'll just kind of come up. You know what I
Yes, so
mean?
yes, it will work itself out. How can we say it that
Right,
way?
right.
Okay, so then
There's go ahead.
no, you said there's no
Oh, there's just there's no plans on giving up writing books. It's just I don't feel the urgency to write 5 books a year right now.
I
I
don't know if
just
any of us feel the urgency to write 5 books a year. Maybe there's somebody, it's not me, that's for sure. Um, no, some reader recently said to me, "Oh, I see that you're having a book coming out in 2023," and I thought to myself, "Maybe."
don't.
Um, I mean, I have one coming out in a couple of weeks. That book is actually I mean, it's written, done, edited, all that, but after that, well, we'll see. Let's move on. So, what are you reading now that's interesting to you? Because I've been spending a lot of time reading bestsellers. It's something I haven't done for years. And reading bestsellers to see where traditional publishing is going. And to be honest, after reading them, I've got no clue. But what kind of things are you reading now? What's like capturing your interest?
Well, I I've been listening to audiobooks, like, because I can do so many other things while I do that. You know what
Yes,
I
I
mean?
listen to them while driving. Trust me, that's what I did
Yeah.
yesterday.
So, especially, like, when I didn't have a car, I'd walk to the grocery store and listen to an audiobook. And so, I've been trying to listen to thrillers. I've been trying to listen to things that were big things, through traditional publishing. Like, I
Mhm.
just listened to, Evelyn Hugo and her 7 husbands or something like
Yes,
that.
The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, something like
Thank
that.
you.
Yes, I'd have to think. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I got interested in listening to I wanted to listen to Daisy Jones and the Six. I started that,
Did you
and
finish that?
I know because it was on my library thing, and it popped it out. Like, darn it. Um,
I know.
what
I only asked because many people have recommended that book to me. I have never gotten past chapter one. I don't know.
is it
I
because
don't
there's
know
so
what
many,
it is.
is it because there's so many voices? There's so many characters?
I don't know. I tried audio and I tried reading it, and I at some point I looked at it. I go, so I'm going to die one day, and I don't need to spend any more time on this. But no, like Mia Hopkins, and I'm sure you know her. She really enjoyed it, and there was somebody else who really enjoyed it, and I it's the Laurel Canyon story, right? Like I just couldn't
Yeah,
figure out.
basically.
Yeah, I couldn't get behind it, but I it's the Taylor Jenkins Reid, right? I just don't know.
Yeah.
I'll think about that later. It's just one of those things that a lot of people have read that I just am like, I don't think this is going to happen. But every so often, I'll get an email from Goodreads where they're like, "Have you read that? We're doing a giveaway of an ebook, a print book, an audiobook," and I'm like, "Yeah, I've tried all that, so I don't know if that's for me." But I know you were listening to a lot of bestsellers. What do you think? I'll ask you because a lot of people I know read mainly indie. What have you found to be the trend in some of these best-selling thrillers? Because I mainly read authors I already like. So I'll read Tana French, I'll read Michael Connelly, I'll read Elizabeth George, and I've read some new ones, and they seem to be like in a different whole world. I don't know what's going on over there.
I don't know. I'd be interested in your take on that. It's like I found an author during COVID that there's a couple authors I fell in love with during COVID. Julia Heberlin. I I'm just I like begged her for for an arc of her next book. I'm like, please, please. um, the guy that wrote Chris Bajalian, I'm probably butchering
Yes.
his last
Yeah.
I flew through about 5 or 6 of his books until I hit one that didn't do it for me, but there was 5 or 6 that really did it for me.
Hmm.
Um, I, um, I don't know, I'm trying to listen to more to get a handle on what, I love, what bores me to tears. Julia Heberlin, I just love. I
What does
just
she write? I have not read. I've never heard of her.
I
And what does she write?
Oh my god, hang on. I don't wanna hang up on you, so I'm gonna try and find her on my phone. Paper Ghost Books, Julia Heberlin. She has one that's optioned with, Sisters Production Company
Hmm.
that is called We Are All the Same in the Dark or something like that. Paper
Hmm.
Ghosts, a novel of suspense. Um, well, listen to this one. A gripping thriller about a man who may or may not have dementia and who may or may not be a serial killer. um,
Oh my god,
well,
dementia is the best defense. I just want to write that now. I'm sorry.
an
It would
obsessive
totally be, yeah.
So the sister of one of the girls who was killed pretends to be this guy's daughter and busts him out of the home to take him on a road trip to figure out
Oh my
where
god.
Yes! Yes! Oh my god, so good. So she's got a new one coming out, but Paper Ghosts, We Are All the Same in the Dark. She's got so many good ones. Black Eyed Susans, and she's got a new one coming out in June. And when I read the description, I'm like, damn you, Julia Heberlin. I could have written that. Except for the astrophysicist part. I could never have written that. you know?
No, that's one thing that's beyond me. So what is it? So what Okay, so let me say this. So what are you finding similar? Because the ones I'm reading, I read Hidden Pictures, that was really popular. And I read a couple of others, and well, there's some that there are more supernatural elements than I've ever seen before, so that's different. Um,
Okay.
and they're more domestic. So, did you read The Perfect Marriage by Geneva
Who's that
Rose?
guy?
Geneva Rose,
No.
Geneva with a J. So it was the number one. It's number one in thrillers. It's been I know because whenever I go to the page to refresh to see where I am, that's always number one. It it's a domestic thriller. A lot of them are domestic thrillers, and I will say this: I have found to be a trend in books where the women marry these guys that they don't know is a completely abusive, crazy control freak, and he hides them
Right.
away, and they can't leave. So he either takes her out of town to her house and hides her away, and that's like the third time he's done it, or he keeps her in town and he hides her away, and it's about how she gets out, and usually there's a child involved, either not her child or her child, but either way she can't leave the child behind. And those are
Right.
really popular, and I have a lot of questions about that because it feels like, given they always make it very hard, like she has no cell phone and he has to lock her up during the day because of internet and all the other things involved, it's getting really,
So kind
really,
of like
really hard to hide somebody.
what was the one where that girl won the Academy Award, the woman, it was Room, right?
Hmm. I think so.
Room, where he stuffed her in the room in the basement and she was
Yeah.
down there when, yeah, kind of like that kind of genre, that kind of like.
Yes, I have married this woman and it absconded her away and she has to get out. But it always starts off sweetly. He's perfect, but he love bombs, obviously. And then somehow like hides her away and alienates her from her family. But not so in the how can I say it? I can't believe I want to say this out loud. Not in the regular abusive way, but in the way
Getting a
where like
regular.
literally she's in a room and he's starving her to death and he only takes her out for parties or, whatever. Um,
I don't
those
think
are
I read
really,
that. Are they popular?
yes, because there were quite a few bestsellers that were like that. So I read 3 or 4 of them and I thought, this is A, the oddest thing I think I've ever read. B, there are more of these than I would have thought. And C, why? Why?
Why, that's just it. It's like, if I get to the point where I'm like, the one with, the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I'm
Mhm.
like, there was a point, I was about a third of the way in, and I'm like, "Well well, darn it, this is a different story than what I thought it was gonna be," and but then I realized, well, she has me so invested with the characters, I just had to keep going anyhow, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it almost sounds like what you're talking about with these other things. So I'm more of, for I enjoy Alistair Burke, but I'm more of a person where I want to see things happen.
Mhm.
I want drama, I want twists and turns, I want drama, I want suspense, I want smart characters, I just don't want someone to sit in a room the whole time because it'll make me nuts. You
It's
know?
they're a little hard because the women start off very smart and then they're out. It always was like the last time they're out. And they're like, "Well, I'm in this restaurant and I have a car, but I'm gonna go home even though he's acting really bizarre," and then they
I'm gonna
can't get
go
out again.
home, little what's his name is acting weird. Like, don't, that's the equivalent of the horror movie, the horror movie, like, don't answer the
Don't open the
phone.
door, I know. I
Or,
know.
oh no, just this one time, I was like, oh,
Mm,
stop. Like, so I hear that. That's why I like, Chris Bajalian
mm.
and Julia Heberlin, because they made it real for me. Like, and that's what I want, that sense of, how much can you do in a room? I mean, if you got an hour and a half with a movie, it's different than if you've got 8 hours with a book.
That's true. What you can do in a room is no, I will not tell you. But it's not a lot. You look at the
I
cracks, you look at the
know.
corners, you look at the lock that you
I
can't open from the
know.
inside. Given the input of this sort of what's going on now, what would you imagine the next thriller that's sort of been? You have texted me like I have thrillers percolating, but what's sort of percolating in your mind in terms of uh, how you'd like to come at that? Because I think you started moving with the courtesan books. You started moving towards something more psychological. Is that where you think you want to
I'll
go?
never
Mm.
I really think so. I'll never forget, like, walking across La Cienega telling you my idea.
My God, save us from LA, man. Doing the parking math. Can we park here? It's got 15 signs. I don't know.
But and it just spawned this whole crazy series that to me was so, like, I really wanna go in a thriller route to see what because, when I wrote my YA time travel, which is Messenger,
Hmm.
Messenger and Believer and Assassin and The Seeker, I wrote that because it was a thriller, ultimately. I'm like, "It's a
Ah,
thriller,"
okay.
right? And then when I wrote the Annie Graceland book, which was my first book, I wrote it because it was funny,
Hmm.
okay? Funny. So funny and then thriller seems to be my 2 things, even though they're in little niches thereof. Like, when I wrote Part-Time Princess,
Hmm.
I my mother was dying, and I wanted to write the funniest book that I could write to help me get through what she was going through.
Right.
And so what was on my mind wasn't to write a book about royalty. What was on my mind was to write a super funny romantic comedy, totally fish out of water. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
So that's where that came from. So I think my mind is divided between, and my heart, funny and thrillers.
Well, there's a lot of road left. So you don't picking a lane is good, but you don't always have to stay on course. So,
Well, I do yeah, I think that giving myself permission to just get to a new place, heal up, get over some of the trauma from the past, whatever, 5 years, 6 years, whatever, and get in a better place physically and emotionally and mentally, and then the writing will fall where it needs to fall.
with that, thank you so much, Pamela Dumont, for
Thank
having the
you.
time to do this chat today.
Oh, so much fun. Thank you. Loved it.
All right, talk soon.
Okay, honey.
This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, author Amy Austin. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll share, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It will help others find and enjoy my conversations with brilliant creators. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I am also the author of the Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. The first two books in the Nicole Long series are now live. You can download Outcry Witness and Major Crimes to your e-reader right now. The third book in the new series, Without Consent, will be available in March 2023. In the meantime, you can pre-order it wherever you get your books. I am also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. These titles are available wherever books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Legal Thriller Author. You can also find this podcast on Facebook at A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with you soon with more great conversations.